continuing chapter 1. Remember, Buck had just gotten kidnapped from Manuel, was sold because of the gambling debts, was carried off into crates, thrown on wagons, put onto a train, and now he's getting beaten by the man with the red sweater and a club. "He's no slouch at dog breaking, that's what I say," said one of the men on the wall, crying enthusiastically. "Druther break Caius's any day, and twice on Sundays," was the reply of the driver, as he climbed on the wagon and started the horses. Buck's senses came back to him, but not his strength. He lay where he had fallen, and from there he watched the man in the red sweater. "Answers to the name of Buck," the man soliloquized, quoting from saloon-keeper's letter, which had announced the consignment of the crate and contents. "Well, Buck, my boy," he went on in a genial voice, "we've had our little ruction, and the best we can do is let it go at that. You'll lose your place. I know mine. Be a good dog. All will go well, and the goose'll hang high. Be a bad dog, and I'll whale the stuffin' out of you. Understand?" As he spoke, he fearlessly patted the head he'd so mercilessly pounded, and though Buck's hair involuntarily bristled at the touch of him, he endured it without protest. When the man brought him water, he drank eagerly, and later bolted a generous meal of raw meat, chunk by chunk, from the man's hands. He was beaten, he knew that, but he was not broken. He saw, once for all, that he stood no chance against a man with a club. He had learned that lesson, and in his afterlife he never forgot it. The club was a revelation. It was his introduction to the reign of primitive law, and he met the introduction halfway. Facts of life took on a fiercer aspect. While he faced that aspect uncowed, he faced it with all the latent cunning of his nature aroused. As the days went by, other dogs came, in crates and at the end of ropes, some docilely, and some raging and roaring as he had come. And one and all, he watched them pass under the dominion of the man in the red sweater. Again and again, as he looked at each brutal performance, the lesson was driven home to Buck. A man with a club was a lawgiver, a master to be obeyed, though not necessarily conciliated. As of this last, Buck was never guilty, though he did see beaten dogs that fawned upon the man and wagged their tails, and licked his hand. He also saw one dog that would neither conciliate nor obey, finally killed in the struggle for mastery. Now and again men came, strangers who talked excitedly, wheelingly, in all kinds of fashion to the man in the red sweater, and at such times that money passed between them the strangers took, one or more of the dogs away with them. Buck wondered where they went, for they never came back, but the fear of the future was strong upon him, and he was glad each time when he wasn't selected. Yet this time came in the end in the form of a little wheezy man who spoke broken English, and strange and uncouth exclamations which Buck couldn't understand. "Sacre dam!" he cried, when his eyes lit upon Buck. "That one damn bully dog, eh? How much?" 300, and a present at that, was the prompt reply of the man in the red sweater. "Seeing it's government money, you ain't got no kick coming, eh, Perrault?" Perrault grinned. Considering that the price of dogs had been boomed skyward by the unwanted demand, it wasn't an unfair sum for such a fine animal. The Canadian government would be no loser, nor would its dispatches travel slower. Perrault knew dogs, and when he looked at Buck, he knew that he was 1 in 1,000. 1 in 10,000, he commented mentally. Buck saw money pass between them, and wasn't surprised when Curly, the good-natured Newfoundland, and he were led away by the little wheezy man. It was the last time he saw the man in the red sweater, and as Curly and he looked at the receding Seattle from the deck of the Narwhal, it was the last he saw of the warm Southland. Curly and he were taken below by Perrault, and turned over to a black-faced giant called Francois. Perrault was French-Canadian and swarthy, but Francois was a French-Canadian half-breed and twice as swarthy. They were a new kind of man to Buck, of which he was destined to see many more. And while he developed no affection for them, he nonetheless grew honestly to respect them. He speedily learned that Perrault and Francois were fair men, calm and impartial in administering justice, and too wise in the ways of dogs to be fooled by dogs. Between decks of the Narwhal, Buck and Curly joined 2 other dogs. One of them was a big, snow-white fellow from Spitzenberg, who had been bought away by a whaling captain, and who later accompanied a geological survey into the Barrens. He was friendly in a treacherous sort of way, smiling into someone's face while he meditated some underhanded trick, for instance when he stole from Buck's food at the first meal. As Buck sprang to punish him, the lance of Francois's whip sang through the air, reaching the culprit first, and nothing remained to Buck but to recover the bone. That was fair, Francois, he decided, and the half-breed began to rise in Buck's estimation. The other dog made no advances, nor received any. Also, he didn't attempt to steal from the newcomers. He was a gloomy, morose fellow, and he showed Curly plainly that all he desired was to be left alone. Further, trouble would cause if he were not left alone. Dave, he was called, and he ate and slept and yawned between times, and took interest in nothing, not even when the narwhal crossed Queen Charlotte Sound, rolled and pitched, and bucked like a thing possessed. When Buck and Curly grew excited, half wild with fear, he raised his head as though annoyed, gave them an incurious glance, yawned, and went to sleep again. Day and night the ship throbbed to the tireless pulse of the propeller, and though one day was very like another, it was apparent to Buck the weather was steadily growing colder. At last, one morning, the propeller was quiet, and the narwhal was pervaded with an atmosphere of excitement. He felt, as did the other dogs, that he knew a change was at hand. Francois leashed them and brought them on deck. The first step on the cold surface, Buck's feet sank into a white, mushy something very like mud. He sprang back with a snort. More of this white stuff was falling from the air. He shook himself, but more of it fell upon him. He sniffed it curiously, then licked some of it on his tongue. It bit like fire, and the next instant was gone. This puzzled him. He tried it again with the same result. The onlookers laughed uproariously, and he was ashamed, but he didn't know why. It was his first snow.